Pedigrees. It's easy to study the genetics of fruit flies or pea plants because the generation time is so short. They have babies very, very quickly, and you can mate any individuals you choose. So you can take a red-eyed male and mate it with a white-eyed female and see what the babies look like. It's different with humans. We tend to have a pretty long generation time, 20 years or so, or a little bit longer. Um, and you can't say who can marry whom. So pedigrees are a good tool for studying family history in the past. What is a pedigree chart? It's a chart that shows the record of a family, of an individual, and we're looking at the transmission of a hereditary condition. So it could be a disease like sickle cell anemia, or it could just be some interesting hereditary condition, like color blindness. I don't know if I'd really call that a disease. They are particularly useful when there are large families and a good family record over several generations. So the goals are to determine the mode of inheritance. Is this genetic thing, is it dominant or recessive? Is there some partial dominance? Is it sex-linked? Is it autosomal? Or is it mitochondrial? So that's what we're going to be looking at. You can also determine the probability of an affected offspring for a given cross. So if this couple were to have more babies, would they, how likely would they be to have this trait in the next generation? Studying human genetics. Today, genetic engineering has new tools to offer doctors studying genetic diseases. So you can actually, for a lot of diseases, see if you actually have the gene for the disease. But the pedigrees are still useful in showing whether a trait is recessive or dominant, or autosomal. I guess that can do that part. So then a genetic counselor will use pedigree charts to help determine the distribution of a disease in an affected family. So here's what you need to know about the charts. The squares are males and the round ones are females. So that's a normal male, and if it's colored in, it's an affected male. And there's a normal female and an affected female. And the goofy thing I usually do to remember this is I tell students the girls are kind of curvy, and this is certainly more curvy than this. So maybe that helps. Sometimes you'll see a carrier drawn like this with maybe a dot in the middle, or sometimes half of it will be colored in. So this means someone who's normal, but they carry one gene, a recessive gene that for that particular trait. And then this last one, when you have a line like that, that's a marriage or a mating. Here's a few more symbols. Here's a regular mating. Here's a consanguineous mating. That means you marry your brother or your cousin. Ew. And here are the offspring. So here's a marriage, and then this means here are their babies. So they had a boy first and then a girl. So organisms in a pedigree chart of a family showing 20 individuals. You typically use Roman numerals to show each generation, but I wouldn't memorize that. But anyway, here's generation 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And so in this, and then you number the people 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, like that. Okay, so each generation, the individuals are identified by Arabic numerals, numbered from the left. So the affected individuals here are Roman numeral 2, number 3. Oops. That's this one. And then this would be Roman numeral 4, numbers 2 and 3. So this is the marriage with 5 children. I think there's a mistake in this. Let's see, 2 daughters and 3 sons. That's correct. The eldest son, nope, sorry, should be the second. Whoa. Should be the second eldest son is affected by the condition. So it goes from oldest to youngest. Types of traits studied using pedigrees. So we want to know if it's autosomal or on a sex chromosome, and we want to know if it's dominant or recessive. Those are typically the things that we're looking at. So what type of pedigree is this, and what's your proof? So you've got a man, and he's got the trait, and he gives it to a daughter and a son. So if it were on the Y chromosome, it would only go to the son. And if it were on the X chromosome, it would only go to the daughter. And you can see here she gives it to 2 boys, and these both have the trait, but they give it to both of the kids. So I would say this is both a girl and a boy. I would say this is very likely autosomal. I guess this one could be a carrier, but I'm thinking it's autosomal. And now look at this. Here's the interesting one. This person doesn't have the trait, but both of the parents do. So if this were recessive, some disease that were recessive, that means every single kid would have to have the trait. So this actually must be a dominant trait. So that way you can do the Punnett square out for those folks. And you can see that they do have a chance of having a kid with the recessive trait here, the normal trait. So this must be a dominant trait. And also the other hint for that is that it's in every single generation. It's not skipping any generations, but here's your absolute proof that it's dominant. So it is dominant because people 5 and 6 have an unaffected child. And it is autosomal because both genders get it in pretty even numbers. Here's an autosomal dominant pedigree. You can see it's in every single generation. And you can't find anybody whose parent didn't have it. So this one has it, and so does a parent, and so does the parent, and so does a parent, and so does a parent. So this one has it, and so does a parent. Here's one who has it, so does their parent, so does their parent, so does their parent, so does their parent. So the trait is common in the pedigree. It's found in every single generation, and it's affecting individuals. The affected individuals transmit the trait to about half of their children, regardless of the gender. So that's why it's autosomal and dominant because everybody has a parent who has it. And you don't see any two people who have the trait with a recessive, with a kid who doesn't have it. Actually, that would actually give you proof. I said that backwards, but still, you see it in every single generation. So even though you don't have proof, it's pretty likely that it's dominant. Here's an example of an autosomal dominant trait. It's achondroplasia. So that's a skeletal disorder. There are many forms of dwarfism, but this is just one form. And you can see the legs have some skeletal abnormalities here. But it's not such a difficult disease that these people don't go on and have kids. So one thing about autosomal dominant traits is that there are a few autosomal dominant traits. They're rare because if you have a disorder that's so difficult that you don't have kids, then it wouldn't go into the next generation. So they're fairly uncommon. Okay, how about this? What kind of pedigree is this and what's your proof? So you have someone who has it, but none of the kids do, and none of the grandkids do. And then you have a cousin marrying a cousin here. Oh my goodness. And they have kids who have it. Imagine that. So this was a recessive trait because this kid had it because it was a recessive trait found. So you had a carrier here and a carrier here. And then the other thing is here you have two folks who have the disorder and all 5 of their kids have it too. So that's looking like it's a recessive trait. And you can see the girls and the boys affected pretty evenly. So I would say autosomal. So it is recessive because the trait skips generations and 2 affected people have 4 kids all with the trait. That's this part. And it is autosomal, meaning not on the X and the Y, because both genders get it in pretty even numbers. Cystic fibrosis is autosomal recessive. So here's just an example. This is a pretty tough disease. Typically, if you have cystic fibrosis, you don't go on and have kids. So here's a boy who has it, and his sister grows up and has a kid with it. So she must be a carrier for it. So this kid has cystic fibrosis. This one's a carrier for it, and her husband must also be a carrier for it. And then they end up having a kid who's a carrier. Who actually has the disease. That should be little c, little c. I don't know if that was clear. So if these two folks, something that I might ask you is, what are the chances that any of these are carriers? And so what you would do is say, well, I know mom is a carrier, and I know dad is also a carrier. And so you can see there's a 25% chance that you would have a totally normal kid, a 50% chance, that's a little c, and that's a little c. 50% chance that you would have a kid who is a carrier and a 25% chance that your kid would have the disorder. So these are some autosomal recessive diseases in humans. So cystic fibrosis is one, sickle cell anemia is another, PKU is another, and Tay-Sachs is another. Sickle cell anemia, I think we've talked about a little bit before. This is a really interesting one because let's take a look at it this way. Let's say you have the normal hemoglobin. That's what it codes for. The disease here is for someone with somewhat different hemoglobin. So anyway, your hemoglobin, if you don't have it, is this globby kind of thing, and that's found inside of your red blood cells. And whether it has a lot of oxygen in it or not, it's kind of globby. If you have the sickle cell disease, you have two traits for it, and your red blood cells might look like that a little bit, but as soon as you get deprived of oxygen, even a little bit, the hemoglobin will actually become fibrous. It'll be pointy, and so your red blood cells will look like that, and they'll get stuck in your little blood vessels, your capillaries, and they'll cause blockages. You'll have little strokes and little heart attacks and pain in your fingers. Very tough way to go through life. So really, really awful disease, but it's actually fairly common in some ethnic groups. And the reason is because if you have one normal gene and one sickle cell gene, you actually do better in places where there's malaria. Malaria is a parasite that's found, well, you get it by being bitten by a mosquito that has the malaria in it. That parasite will get into your red blood cells. And if you have one good, one bad gene, or one normal, one sickle gene, and you get the parasite in you, they'll use up your oxygen, and actually your red blood cells will do this. But normally they do this. So most of your life, you're walking around with red blood cells like this. And so you do great. When you get bitten by the malaria parasite, your red blood cells with a parasite in them will do this. Your white blood cells will come along, eat them up, and the malaria parasite will go away, and you won't get sick. Whereas the rest of your life, you're kind of more like this. So these folks do great when they live in an area where there's malaria. These folks never do great, and these folks do great unless they get bitten by the a malaria-containing mosquito. And if that happens, then those folks die, whereas these folks would live. So this is called heterozygote superiority, meaning both homozygous folks don't do as well as the heterozygous one does. So that's why they think this disorder is so common. So sickle cell anemia is found in Africans, people of African descent. So for each of these, the heterozygote superiority has been suggested as a factor in maintaining the disease alleles at a high frequency in some populations. You would think with such an awful disorder that you would have fewer and fewer people with the disease, but it's not true because of this heterozygote advantage. Okay, what type of pedigree is this, and why do you think so? Okay, so let's take a look at this. You've got a male, and his daughters, every single one of his daughters has it. And then you have a girl, and both of her, 50% of her kids have it, boy and girl. A girl and her boy has it, a girl and her boy and girl have it. A boy is giving it only to his girls, and a boy is giving it only to his girls. So this is going to be X-linked, and it's going to be dominant, because if you have the disease, so does your parent, so does your parent, so does your parent. It's kind of an unusual one. So notice that the fathers pass the trait on to all of the daughters, but none of the sons, because here's a dad, right? Here's his bad gene. He gives his Y chromosome to his boys, right? When these things split up in meiosis, the X chromosome goes to some sperm and the Y chromosome goes to some sperm. So if the Y fertilizes the egg, then you get a boy. If the X fertilizes an egg, then you get a girl with that problem. When a girl makes babies, so she got a bad X chromosome plus a good one from mom, good one from mom, good one from mom, good one from mom. Anyway, when this girl makes babies, she'll make some eggs with the bad gene and some eggs with the good gene. Whoops, I didn't mean to draw it that way. Some eggs with the good gene. And anyway, so about 50% of her kids have it. Half of her kids get that X, half of her kids get that X, regardless of their gender. So mothers pass the traits on to sons and daughters. So this is an X-linked dominant trait. Sex-linked means the same thing, although this could be Y-linked. In this case, so this is more general. In this case, you know specifically it's an X-linked dominant trait. This one is actually showing you carriers. So what type of pedigree is this, and why do you think so? Notice that girls can be carriers, but boys can't. And they're actually showing you the X's and Y's here. So this one is a little bit clearer, I think. This is X-linked, and it's recessive, because if you have one good gene, one bad gene, you're only a carrier. So the affected moms have affected sons. Like that, if you're fully affected, you have to give your bad X chromosome to your boy, and that's what he gets. Half circles represent carriers. The affected dads have unaffected sons but carrier daughters. So here's a dad. His son is just fine, but his daughter's a carrier because his daughter gets that X chromosome, but his son gets the Y. So half circles, I think I said that already. Females express it only if they get a copy from both parents. And it's expressed in males if it's present. So they don't get to be carriers because they only have one X chromosome. So this one is X-linked and it's recessive because if it were dominant, you wouldn't have a carrier, you'd just have the disease. Whoops. So hemophilia is an X-linked recessive disease. You might recognize these folks, William and Henry, Prince William, right? And his mom and dad, Diana and Charles. So Princess Di and Charles, and then their parents, Queen Elizabeth, the current queen. Anyway, so if you look at this, this is the pretty well recorded group of folks here who are a family, a famous family with hemophilia. So if you look at these, the boys have hemophilia, and they typically don't have kids because they die, and the girls can be carriers. So there are the girls that are carriers, and there they are. What type of pedigree is this, and why do you think so? Let's see. The man gives it to his sons, and that man gives it to all of his sons, and that man gives it to his son, and that man gives it to his son, and that man gives it to his sons. So this is Y-linked. So only males get it, and it's Y-linked. I actually don't know why I put recessive in there because it can't be dominant or recessive because you don't get two Y chromosomes. Oh, I guess if there were a non-disjunction and someone got XYY, maybe it could be recessive. Interesting. But that doesn't show in this. Here's a really cool one, and this is, I think, too complex to be on. I think it's probably too complex to be on an MCAS. But here's a girl or woman, and all of her kids have the disorder. And here's a guy, and none of his kids have it. And here's a woman, and all of her kids have it. So this one is kind of funky, huh? This one is mitochondrial. So what type of pedigree is it? It is a mitochondrial disorder. Interesting, huh? Okay, how is this trait most likely inherited? All right, take a look at this. There are two people who have it, boy and girl, and their parents were cousins. Oh my goodness. That's recessive because their parents don't have it. Um, and it's on an autosome probably because both a boy and a girl have it. So autosomal recessive. How is this trait most likely inherited? Okay, here is a man. He gives it to his daughter and his son. So that means it's not on the Y chromosome and not on the X chromosome, unless she's a carrier. Here's a guy and his daughter and his son have it. Here's a woman and her son and daughter also have it. So anyway, I'm going to call this autosomal dominant because it's in every generation. Looks like it's autosomal dominant. How is this trait inherited? Let's see. Here's two people, and all of their kids have it. Here's someone, and his daddy has it, and here's someone, and her mom has it. Here's someone, and the parents don't have it. That means it has to be recessive. And if it is recessive, you would expect two people with it would have all of their kids with it. So autosomal recessive. Autosomal because the men and the women get it in even numbers. How about this one? You have someone who has it, but the parents don't, but the grandfather did. So it's skipping generations, so it must be recessive. And it's found only in boys. This is a tiny pedigree, so it's hard to say. I'm going to guess that it's X-linked, but it's really kind of small to say. Sex-linked recessive. Yeah, it's kind of too small of a pedigree to know for sure, but that's what it looks like. Let's see, this one they're giving you the X's and the Y's. Oh, so this is actually the same one they're showing you this time that they're carriers. How about this one? Oh, I already wrote it in. It's sex-linked dominant. Okay, so a boy has it and all of his daughters do, and a girl has it and it's evenly distributed between boys and girls. So yeah, that's looking like X-linked dominant because it's in every generation. And I think that's the end of my story.